You may have noticed that the first reading in the gospel started with people in misery, kind of anguish and suffering. There's a much longer part to that in the first reading about Naaman. He was a general in Syria and the top general, and he could fight off the battles and go and beat and overcome other armies, other soldiers, and that's why he was the top general. But leprosy had attacked his body, and there's nothing he could do about it. He's in anguish. Top general, but had a death notice there. And also in the gospel, we hear of 10 lepers who see Jesus walking by, and we realize that lepers are outcasts, and they had to cry unclean, and they were kicked out, and they couldn't be with their families. They lived a miserable, poor life, and they were doomed to a life of misery and suffering. That's how we start out with those readings. And when we are in a situation of suffering, of pain, of anguish, whether it's physical or emotional, spiritual, whatever kind, we desire some relief, don't we? We desire some healing. At least give me some relief first, and then let's work towards the healing. And that same thing is true of us today. We're humans after all. Whether it's our own suffering or our own anguish or someone else's, there is a deep desire for some relief and some healing so that we can get back to life the way it was meant to be, the way we wanted to be. And so the 10 lepers went to Jesus and said, "Master, Jesus, have mercy on us." And Jesus said, "Well, go show yourselves to the priest." And they were cleansed on the way. If we are fortunate enough when we are in our own suffering, our own injuries, our own illnesses, to be healed, that's what we want to see. It's what we want to hear. Go someplace, they can take care of you. Call up your doctor or whatever medical professional you need. Get the right kind of medicine, the right kind of care, the right kind of operation. Then you'll be all set. And as it happened for those 10, they were. And can you imagine how happy they were? Outcasts, doomed to a life of misery. Now they're cleansed. That can be affirmed and by the priest, and that they can go home and meet their families and pick up their life again. Thanks very much, Jesus. You did us a good job. It's kind of like us when we go to our medical professionals, and if we're fortunate enough that they can find some way to help us to heal, we say, "Thanks a lot. You'll hear from my insurance company." We hope. And great, and I'll be on my way. And we got your number in case something else happens again. And unfortunately, we can tend to do the same thing with God. When we're down and out and suffering and in anguish for whatever reason, especially the physical, emotional, mental kinds of pain and suffering we can be in, we go to God in our need, which is the right thing to do, is to go to God in our need, and then we find out that there's a healing that happens through Him, through medical people, through the people around us, and it's like, oh great, I'm healed. Thanks God, I got your number. It's called prayer. I'll get back to you if I need you. And that's what the 9 did, and who can blame them? But if we look hard enough in these readings, we can discover something even more that Naaman and the other Samaritan, the leper, the Samaritan, discovered. we can discover something about ourselves, and we can discover something about God. What we can discover about ourselves is how human we are. Get to know our weaknesses much better. And like Naaman, we might be able to hold court over other people, but we can't even hold court over our own bodies. Can't make ourselves get well. We find out what our limitations are, our inadequacy, our weaknesses. And oftentimes in the midst of that, our tendencies towards sin come out, our bad moods and the ways we might treat people. And we find out, indeed, how weak and how needy we are. We can find out that we are not independent agents, that we need other people, and it is by their support that we make it through whatever the struggle or the suffering is. That's what we can find out and more about ourselves, which is a good thing to know. I'm human. We all are. We're not God. We need one another. We need God. But not just for the healing. What goes on with Naaman as well as with the Samaritan is this, that they realize the giver of the gift. They realize the healer. And they go back. And Naaman says, I realize now that there is no other God, that is the God of all. There is one God, and it is your God. And I'm taking back some of the dirt of your land to remind me of that so I can put it down and pray there, that I want a relationship with this God. And the Samaritan comes back and thanks God, and Jesus says, your faith has saved you. Inviting him into a relationship with God, which isn't based just on need, but rather which is based on a day-to-day, heartfelt relationship with the divine himself. And in that suffering and in that anguish that we go through, we can learn all sorts of stuff about God himself. One thing we might learn is that God isn't testing us. He's God. Why does he got to test us? He already knows our hearts. What's in it for him to test us? He's not testing us. Life tests us. God is there to strengthen us through our faith. God doesn't test us. We just might learn that. We might learn that God isn't punishing us, despite those things that we might have heard other people say or have said ourselves time and again. Well, God will get you for that. And now when we're, suffering whatever it is, we think, what did I do? Why is God punishing me? And we might learn as we live through this, hopefully in faith, there's nothing in it for God for him to punish us. He came to strengthen us and to heal us, just like we heard in the gospel today and in that first reading from the Old Testament. He is there for our healing and our strength and our fullness of life. We just might learn that about God. And there's a bunch of other stuff too. God is unfathomable. We can never know enough about him. We can never know him in his fullness. It's kind of in those wounds that we have that we discover the greatness of God. And on the positive side, what might we learn is that God has only goodwill for us. That's it. Love. Goodwill. We just might discover that. And about anyone or anything that we can trust in, it is in God himself, who has nothing but goodwill and divine love meant for us. And whatever pain and suffering we're going through now, well, it's real. And it won't last. Even though sometimes it feels like it will. One way or another, God will bring it to a good end. So instead of just saying, I know God's number, I know how to get a hold of him, I might just stay and say instead, I walk with him every day. He invites us into that kind of a relationship where we come to know him and experience him and see him, his love, every day. And he asks us to be the kind of people who are his very presence in this world, that they might know the God of strength, the God who is faithful, the God who has goodwill for us, the God of love, how we treat them from what we have experienced of God himself.